County deputy used enough force to leave an innocent man brain damaged. Do you think the sheriff would do some soul searching about whether changes were in order?
Instead, King 5 investigator Linda Byron found the sheriff's office did nothing in that and other use of force cases. Linda, I understand there's something, somewhat of a twist in this one, too.
There is, actually, Lori. When we first brought our findings to the sheriff, she seemed surprised and she was defensive. But then, after sleeping on it, she did something I've never seen before.
The two of us intersected right here on this square of sidewalk. He did a full body takedown on me from behind. I guess he swept my feet out from under me and then pushed my face into the pavement.
Seattle computer consultant Jeff Gold will never forget his encounter with King County Sheriff's Deputy Matt Paul.
Expected him to maybe yell at me and wag a finger or something. Did not expect a full-on body tackle and having my face smashed into the pavement. And this was the moment when the officer became aware of my presence.
Gold admits he antagonized Paul by taking pictures while the deputy was reprimanding people for drinking in a bus shelter, and then by jaywalking.
And you're seeing my forehead all abraded.
But Gold doesn't think he deserves what he got.
I don't see any circumstances where jaywalking results in blood flow.
Gold was arrested, but never charged. He fired off an angry email to the sheriff.
I wanted the incident investigated to the extent that I sincerely believed that the officer had overstepped his bounds.
Gold never got his investigation.
Code 4250.
A lapse that's hard to understand, considering Paul is the same deputy who knocked a man into a wall a year earlier.
There, but for the grace of God, go I. I mean, that could have been me easily.
The case of Chris Harris was deeply upsetting. It's still hard to watch the video of the blow that left Harris so brain damaged he can't even feed himself.
An investigation should be done into what happened.
The sheriff promised accountability. A news release 2 days after the incident announced Paul was on paid leave. Detectives would complete their investigation within days. The file would then go to internal investigations for policy review and possible discipline. And finally, the Seattle police chief would review it to ensure it was complete and without bias. That's not at all what happened, and we wanted to know why. So we came straight to the top, here, to the King County Sheriff, to ask for an explanation.
This was a very unique case. We did not have a process in place that would accommodate this unusual set of circumstances.
Instead of taking swift action, the sheriff's office seemed immobilized. The use of force review, typically done immediately, put on hold, not completed until 9 months later, long after Paul had quietly returned to the street.
Switch it up.
And even then, a key recommendation wasn't followed.
Get a new partner.
Giving deputies use of force options and defensive tactics training, like this. Has there been any department-wide retraining? Has there been any retraining of the officer?
Not as a result of this specific case. Again, this was a very unexpected, unique set of circumstances.
Internal investigations never even got the case. Why wouldn't you have your internal investigations unit look at this to make sure there was no misconduct?
There was no need for that, Linda. We had witness statements. We had a very clear investigation.
She's talking about the investigation done by her major crimes unit. It was exhaustive, hundreds of pages of interviews and reports. But by failing to send the Harris case to another police department, the sheriff never got the second opinion she'd promised. Did you do enough?
I think we did enough.
What no one did was take a blanket look at Paul's use of force over his 5.5-year career. That is, until we reviewed his file last month. We found 19 use of force cases and 7 complaints to internal investigations, 2 of them as recent as December. That's a lot of complaints. Many officers go their entire careers without even one. Why is King 5 the only one looking at this officer in the big picture?
Well, you're not the only one looking at him. As I said, we have looked at his file.
But you can't tell me today if you think his use of force across the board throughout his career is acceptable.
Well, I can tell you it's acceptable in the context of following the policy.
But after that interview, something unusual happened.
Thank you for coming back, Linda.
The sheriff asked for a second chance.
And frankly, it's a little embarrassing that you ask the right questions. I think you deserve an answer. I think the public deserves the answers to those tough questions.
She told us Paul was now being put on a personal performance plan and sent back to the academy for additional training.
I do believe that he can make some different decisions, and we want him to make some different decisions, and we're going to do that. I'm not going to go on television and trash one of my employees, but I'm also not going to ignore a pattern that I'm concerned about.
She promised the jaywalker would get his investigation.
To be honest, it fell through the cracks.
And that outside review of Harris the sheriff promised 2 years ago, it's finally going to happen.
I have complete confidence that it was a thorough, objective investigation. I understand in a case that's this high profile, the necessity of having an outside agency review it as well.
And the sheriff says she will let us know as soon as she gets an outside agency on board for that review. And in the meantime, there's a lot happening with Deputy Paul. He's been sent to training all this week to improve his communication skills and handling of crisis situations. He's been told he's being watched and he'll be on a personal improvement plan for at least 6 months. The sheriff also promising to take a look at department-wide training across the board.
Okay, so Linda, you were the one that initially connected all the dots to Deputy Paul. What do we expect going forward then?
That's really going to be the test here. The sheriff says that she didn't see the big picture, but in the future she's expecting that this new early intervention system that will alert supervisors about problems with multiple use of force cases, that will trigger an alarm. What happens after that is up to her.
All right. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
Good stuff.
Number 1 at 11. King 5 News starts now.
Good evening. We got a lot of response following our investigation into the King County deputy who left an innocent man brain damaged.
The victim's family contacted us, and so did police officers, urging us to dig deeper. So we did.
And tonight, King 5 investigator Linda Byron exposes alarm bells that were sounded years ago in some unlikely places.
This is the Chris Harris his family misses.
He just lived life to the fullest.
What are the secrets to fine cooking?
Seasoning.
Kitchen time with Mom.
He used to love to eat and cook and eat. He can't do that. He's on a feeding tube. He can't turn over.
It's my honor to pronounce you husband and wife.
Plans for a baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. and Ms. Harris.
When we're not in the room, we have a baby monitor to watch him. We have to monitor Chris 24/7.
This is the blow that altered Chris's life.
I will never, to the day I die, get that out of my head.
Yeah. I see a wonderful person dying. The person we knew is no longer here.
Chris had been wrongly identified as a suspect, but when police came after him, he ran.
It's 1-something in the morning. You have 2 big guys in Belltown. They don't identify themselves. Anybody would run. I would run.
Yeah.
You would run.
It was Deputy Matt Paul who ended the chase with a near-fatal body slam. Was it excessive? The sheriff says no.
We've debated this a lot. What could he have done differently? We don't have an answer.
But the sheriff didn't do the internal investigation or get the outside review she'd promised. And she didn't take a comprehensive look at her deputy. By poring through thousands of internal documents, the King 5 investigators identified a pattern of unnecessary force and questionable tactics before and after the Harris incident.
Had you kind of given up on an investigation ever happening?
Absolutely.
Chris's family says it's the investigation they'd been waiting for 2 years.
What we have known for a long time, that we wanted out there, that people to know that this guy's a thug and the sheriff's department is covering up for him.
But the Harrises aren't the only people we heard from after our stories aired. We heard from police, too. One tip led us here to the Basic Law Enforcement Academy in Burien, where warnings about Deputy Paul surfaced years ago.
Ready? Go! Pull him more, pull him more. Step, 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 step.
In 2007, Deputy Paul was being paid to help out at the academy with defensive tactics training, similar to what you see here.
Put your left hand out, right hand out to the side, palm up.
It can get physical.
Cover your entry, cover your connection.
But Paul was considered too rough and aggressive.
Circle, circle, circle.
even by police standards. I talked with a Tacoma police officer who felt the brunt of Matt Paul's force during a mock scenario here at the training academy. She says she was knocked down, he fell on top of her and was choking her with her baton to the point where she nearly passed out. She says an instructor intervened, but not before she was injured. The academy commander waved a red flag. In an internal email obtained by the King 5 investigators, Commander Ron Griffin wrote to Paul's bosses at the sheriff's office, warning he exhibited behaviors that were a concern, and we no longer wished to use him. The concerns included using force far above the norm and showing a macho-type demeanor not acceptable to our goals. Griffin even extended the red flag to Paul's work on the street. If Matt's behavior is upsetting to us at the academy, he is likely exhibiting poor behavior to the public or fellow deputies. Paul's chief, Scott Kimmerer, responded that he would counsel him and that Paul's issues at the academy could be seen as an early warning indicator that Paul should be monitored down the road. Why wasn't he watched more closely?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for you.
Sergeant John Urquhart concedes the sheriff's office dropped the ball.
He should have been watched more closely. We should have worked with him more closely. It's not a question of watching him, not a question of looking over his shoulder, because that's not going to do anything. The question is working with him, training him, mentoring him.
That mentoring and training is happening now, but only after Paul used force in 19 cases and accumulated 7 complaints over his 5.5-year career. Is it time for the sheriff to cut him loose?
Sheriff has said she's not going to do that. She believes that when we do our job properly, Matt Paul will do his job properly.
For the family still struggling to accept Chris's fate, there's only one answer for the deputy who caused it.
He should not be a police officer, period, in any state, any city, any country.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be a police officer. He should not be working that way.
Linda Byron, King 5 News.
After we brought our findings to the sheriff, she sent the deputy to training to improve his communication skills and handling of crisis situations. And she ordered weekly reviews with the sergeant. And the sheriff says the Renton Police Department has agreed to review the Harris investigation.
If you call 911, you expect the police officer who shows up to act like a professional, and most do.
But we found one who has crossed that line repeatedly. Tonight, the King 5 investigators expose an officer with a record number of complaints over the past 2 years. Linda Byron joins us with her investigation. Linda.
Well, Dennis, Mimi, we're talking about a King County Sheriff's deputy who was hired in 2006 after working as a police officer in Southern California for 12 years. Now, in our extensive review of his file, we found he's racked up more than 24 misconduct violations, yet he's received hardly any discipline. His name is Kevin Savage, and his problems on the Sheriff's Department surfaced 2 years ago. The first documented complaint involved what should have been a minor incident at this apartment complex in Skyway. It was the summer of 2009, and kids were throwing things off a balcony. According to internal documents obtained by King 5, Deputy Savage illegally entered the apartment, swore at the young children, and forcefully arrested their mother without probable cause. Sheriff Sue Rahr issued a scathing memo telling Savage his actions sent the message that police officers are unprofessional and bullies who threaten people into cooperating. She ordered a 3-day suspension. The next month, more accusations of unprofessional conduct surfaced, this time from other deputies, who said Savage would criticize and berate them in front of citizens. Savage got corrective counseling and a warning. Quote, "You will need to understand and apply how we do police work here." In early 2010, Deputy Savage became a regular patrol deputy here on Vashon Island. It's a remote district, and he had absolutely no supervision. Deputy Savage quickly developed a reputation. He was seen buying wine at this gas station and supermarket while in uniform. He was often seen in this bar in the center of town playing pool, on duty and in uniform. According to internal reports, Savage said it was his way of doing community policing, and he kept doing it even after being ordered to stop.
that many people on the island who did come in contact with him found him to be intimidating, often inappropriate.
Attorney Steve Mueller started looking into Savage after taking on the case of a woman who'd been arrested for assault outside this Vashon restaurant. Witnesses disputed police accounts of the arrest, and Mueller says Savage went about tracking them down. Listen to how Mueller describes those interactions.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, the deputy went to one witness's house, more or less demanding that she come outside and meet with him, began to demand that the witness change her testimony, took out his baton, lunged at her, scared the bejesus out of her.
Jared says he got a late-night visit too, and pressure that continued for months.
It was definitely blatant. It was, you know, after calling me a liar, he then told me that I would be found guilty in a court of law for perjury for lying.
Jared says he finally switched his car registration into his wife's name to avoid being pulled over.
That I could have become a target for more harassment.
Vashon residents complained they were being policed by a bully with a badge, and Savage was moved. It would take months to sort out the mess he left behind. In the end, a top commander ruled Savage had committed misconduct 18 times while on Vashon and recommended a 20-day suspension. The sheriff cut that down to just 5. Meantime, Savage was patrolling Skyway, White Center, and South King County, racking up new complaints along the way. According to this internal investigation, last spring, Savage made sexually inappropriate comments to a 15-year-old girl. And sources tell me there's another internal investigation underway in which he reportedly told a teen he could sexually assault her with a pen, and she could do nothing to stop it. We reviewed the deputy's file and found in just 2 years he's been the target of 17 internal investigations and has had 26 findings of misconduct. Everything from conduct unbecoming to insubordination to inappropriate use of authority. We had a lot of questions for Deputy Savage, but he didn't return our phone calls, and our knocks on his door went unanswered. Deputy Savage? We also wanted to talk to the sheriff about Deputy Savage and why he's gotten so little discipline despite his pattern of misconduct violations. But the sheriff said she can't talk about him until 4 cases still under investigation are resolved.
What is Deputy Savage doing now?
He was put on administrative leave in June, so for more than 4 months he's been off work but getting paid over $7,000 a month. He has a meeting with the sheriff next week to discuss the outcome of those 4 open investigations. We'll have to see what happens.
All right. Linda, thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
A deputy is fired for a lack of integrity and bad behavior after the King 5 investigators expose a pattern of problems. Tonight, for the first time, the King County Sheriff sits down with Linda Byron to talk about how she disciplined this officer. And you'll hear internal recordings that shed new light on the deputy's actions.
Whether patrolling Skyway or Vashon Island, where King County Deputy Kevin Savage went, a trail of complaints followed. A King 5 investigation found that in just 2 years, Savage has been the target of 22 internal investigations and has had at least 30 findings of misconduct. Everything from conduct unbecoming to insubordination to inappropriate use of authority. On November 10th, he was fired. What tipped the scales in his case?
Once again, I really can't comment on his case till we're through the appeal process.
You know the public wants answers.
I absolutely know that, Linda, and I know that this is a great point of frustration for the people in public.
Sheriff Surar wouldn't discuss Savage's many misconduct violations, saying he could use her comments to fight his termination.
Yeah, oftentimes with the county sheriff department.
But Professor Matt Hickman, who teaches criminal justice at Seattle University, says there's an impact on public trust when a deputy stays on the job despite a pattern of bad behavior.
Well, for public trust, the faster the better. The quicker you can do something, the better it is from the public's point of view, because they want to see an accountable police.
In 2009, citizens and deputies alike complained Savage was behaving inappropriately. after Savage entered this apartment illegally, swore at young children, and forcefully arrested their mother, the sheriff told him his behavior sent a message that police officers are unprofessional and bullies who threaten people into cooperating. She gave Savage 3 days off without pay. Is a 3-day suspension serious discipline?
Yes, it is.
It doesn't look like it.
Well, and I understand why it looks like that to people, but in the context of all types of misconduct and what is consistent with past practice, 3 days is in that range.
In 2010, Savage started patrolling Vashon Island. He often played pool in this bar, sometimes for hours, while on duty and in uniform. He did it even after being told to stop. In January of this year, Savage was hauled before the Internal Investigations Unit. We obtained the 2-hour recorded interview. Listen to how Savage explains his behavior.
My intent was not recreational. My intent was to gather information, get to know people, and, build bridges. These are the people you serve. You're actually hanging out with them instead of sitting at your storefront, sitting at your substation on your butt.
During that interview, Savage admits that while in uniform, he often smoked, sometimes swore at citizens, and didn't always follow the letter of the law. But he denied ever crossing the line, saying his tactics were intelligence tools, and his goal was always community policing.
I'm just trying to do my job. I actually do good work.
Linda Byron, King 5 News.
In firing Savage, the sheriff's office cited 2 incidents from last summer. Police investigators concluded the deputy abused his authority, engaged in unbecoming conduct, and lied about what happened.
If you broke the rules and racked up complaints on the job, you'd probably be fired. But what if you're a police officer?
Since May, the King 5 investigators have been examining how the King County Sheriff handles deputies who cross the line. Tonight, Sheriff Sue Rahr sits down with Linda Byron to talk about whether she's doing enough to hold her officers accountable.
Reports of lax discipline in the King County Sheriff's Office made headlines in 2005 with the PI series Conduct Unbecoming. That prompted the creation of a blue ribbon panel.
So we identified several problems
and recommendations for major reforms.
Improve supervision, not just the sergeants, but commanders at the precincts.
Everything from increased training to better systems for investigating complaints, plus outside independent oversight. The sheriff embraced the changes.
They obviously found places that we can improve, and I agree with them.
But this year, the King 5 investigators exposed 2 cases that raise questions about whether the sheriff is still too slow to identify problem deputies, investigate allegations of misconduct, and take action. 163. Take the case of Deputy Matt Paul. In 2009, he slammed an innocent man into a wall, leaving him brain damaged. 1 year later, Paul tackled a jaywalker to the ground. It was the King 5 investigators who reviewed Paul's file and found him using force and generating complaints at a much higher rate than most deputies. The sheriff conceded she should have watched him closer.
And frankly, it's a little embarrassing that you ask the right questions.
Then there's Deputy Kevin Savage. He was fired after the King 5 investigators reported that he'd been the target of 22 internal investigations and had 30 findings of misconduct in just the past 2 years. In 2006, you promised accountability. That was the blue ribbon panel. Have you kept that promise? Is this what accountability looks like?
Yes, it is, Linda. What you're talking about are 2 cases that are clearly anomalies to the behavior of my deputies.
The sheriff says any discipline she imposes can be challenged under the contract between her office and the police guild. Are the unions too strong? Do they make it too hard for you to do the right thing?
No, they don't. They hold me to a very high standard.
The sheriff says she has to meet a just cause checklist established through collective bargaining. Was the deputy warned? Is the policy reasonable? Was there a thorough, fair investigation? Proof of wrongdoing? Equal treatment across the ranks for the same misconduct? Was the penalty appropriate? Rahr says that checklist explains why a deputy like Matt Paul is put on a personal improvement plan instead of receiving harsher punishment. And she says it's why Deputy Savage wasn't fired sooner.
This wasn't about tolerance for bad behavior. This is about developing a case that we can prove and that will be upheld.
The sheriff is in for a fight. The Police Guild voted to back Savage in appealing his termination. To put that into perspective, in the last 5 years, the sheriff fired 19 deputies. 6 of them appealed. 2 of them were reinstated.
Is it too hard to fire a cop?
No, it's not too hard. We ask police officers to risk their life every day protecting the community.
Linda Byron, King 5 News.
The King County Police Officers Guild did not respond to numerous interview requests. As for the Independent Office of Law Enforcement Oversight that was recommended 5 years ago, it just got funded in September. The new director wouldn't go on camera to explain how he will investigate complaints, saying he's still getting up to speed.